This umbrella review, essentially a review of 17 reviews from 2022, found no consistent evidence that depression is caused by or even associated with low levels of serotonin, in essence, challenging the widely held theory that depression is caused by a chemical imbalance.
Depression is associated with a few things: the abnormal transmission or depletion of certain neurotransmitters, especially serotonin,
Thus, raising an important question: if serotonin isn't the cause, what is? It also raises doubts as to what then exactly the widely prescribed antidepressants do, if anything. However, there's a seemingly overlooked theory of depression formulated almost a century ago that can answer these questions, but it might be a tough pill to swallow, pun intended. The findings of this umbrella review should not come as a surprise to you if you're at all familiar with the reformulated Freudian ideas of psychoanalysis, or existentialism too for that matter. A unique combination of these two schools of thought can be found in Ernest Becker's book Denial of Death. Becker, using the works of Kierkegaard and Otto Rank, reformulates some of the core Freud's ideas through the existentialist lens. Keep in mind, in the psychoanalytic way of understanding humans, almost nothing is taken at face value and a lot is interpreted as a defense tactic against reality, a repression. Being in its purest form is seen as unbearable, what with all its complexity, chaos, and torment. Thus, the psyche survives and adapts by shielding itself against existence. Depression is taken seriously, don't get wrong idea, but it is interpreted not quite as an illness, but rather as a defensive shield, a neurotic survival mechanism. Becker argues that at bottom, we humans are tormented by a duality. On the one hand, our finitude, mortality, limitedness in terms of time and our bodies. The term used is creatureliness. But on the other hand, our infinitude, our symbolic and cultural existence, and the proceeding fear of individuation or heroic transcendence of that mortality. In this sense, everyone is neurotic to some degree, as in everyone has imperfect defenses against reality. But the problem arises when those defenses become too rigid, take over, or fail. Depression is fascinating because while it can be considered as a failed defense, it is still a defense. One of the psychology giants, Alfred Adler, called depression a problem of courage. To understand courage, it is crucial to acknowledge how unimaginably terrifying naked being truly is. Anyway, Becker cites the term systemic self-restriction when talking of depression and describes it as a vicious circle. The less you do, the less you can do, and the more paralyzed and dependent you become. A depressed person is seen as one who experienced too many silent retreats and has found themselves wedged in a corner. Becker points out that for most of us, this heroic transcendence is almost unattainable, but the longing for it, in other words, for some sort of immortality, never ceases, so one looks for it in our close circles. Thus, one becomes increasingly dependent on others, sacrifice their individuation, which necessitates separation, in order to feel safe and protected against life and death. Dependency is a basic mammalian survival mechanism. When one loses hope of coping, fleeing, or fighting, one is reduced to a state of helplessness, depression. The stripping of defenses becomes the final line of defense. How fascinating. I say final because we all know what follows if one is unable to overcome it. That is why trying to tackle depression itself is foolish. It would be the same as taking someone's umbrella. It doesn't solve the rain. Even if it would be possible to just medicate it away, there would be no relief. At best, only numbness. I want to linger on the dependency part a bit. When looking back on my own experience with depression, I always wondered, why I felt so guilty at the time. It sometimes felt like the guilt tormented me more than the depressive state itself. How is that a defense? Becker answered my questions in a few sentences. Guilt, that is often felt by someone depressed, is a manifestation of existential guilt, one that comes from failure to live up to one's potential. Facing that existential guilt is too much. It risks annihilation of the final defense, so it gets attached, projected to others. Guilt of abandoning home, of changing jobs, of leaving, of being selfish, you name it. It is via this guilt that one stays attached and thus protected, not needing to transcend oneself. One chooses to rather seem good in the eyes of others than to go out naked into the world. The whole of psychology has been great at releasing people from these destructive attachments, but the core existential problem remains, likely never to be solved. However, the existential moral to this story is that one must consent daily to die, to face up and give oneself up to the risks and dangers of the world in order to live. This is called the hero's journey. Otherwise, one ends up as though dead when trying to avoid life and death. This is a failure to be the hero and transcend your limitations. Of course, we are talking of the ideal, and by definition, an ideal is unattainable, unreachable. Like Dostoevsky brilliantly asked in Notes from Underground, what would we do if we finally reached that treasure island that we endlessly and relentlessly sail towards to? I'm not sure. With all of this said, of course, from an existential perspective, depression is not caused by a chemical imbalance. Of course, pills will not magically remove the problem, because removing it would mean, well, likely disintegration and collapse. Obviously, this discussion is far more complex than a YouTube video, and the neuroscience behind the pharmacology is way out of my field. But nevertheless, I find it important to speak bluntly on existential terms and not give in to the illusion of one pill fixes it all solution. I believe that an unimaginable amount of treasure lies in the past, and we must constantly revisit it, dig it up, and polish it to be used in the future. See you next time.